Build single-threaded teams. At the planet level, every single business unit gets its own leadership team. If there is one thing that I've seen that is massively overrated in holding companies, especially holding companies where they're not all doing exactly the same thing, it is the word synergy. We have tried this again and again and again. Oh, let's buy this company. Let's bring it into the fold, and let's have our marketing team do marketing for all of these different companies. It'll be great. It literally has never worked. Two sessions. The first session that we're going to go through, we call the portfolio entrepreneur. And it's exactly what Sam talked about. How do we go about operating, owning and operating multiple companies at the same time? One way that we do it is we don't operate them, okay? And so when you heard from Richard earlier, and I say you need a Richard, eventually you're going to need a lot of Richards if you want to have a lot of companies in your portfolio group. So we're going to speak to structure. We're going to speak to general best practices. If you have questions related to this topic, write them down, hold them. We're going to tackle all your questions when we go through. The second part of this session, we're going to go through how to invest like an entrepreneur, how to be an entrepreneurial investor, how we invest our own money as these businesses generate a lot of distributable cash. As you have exits, what do you do with that money? Do you just give it, put it in in an index fund? Do you just give it to a fund man? What do you do with the money? We're going to share what we do. Disclaimer, this is not individual investment advice. Past performance is no indicative of future performance. Your results may vary. Okay? How'd I do? Is that pretty good?
And you're very likely to lose your full investment.
Yeah, you'll almost certainly lose your full investment. But we're going to tell you, we're going to say this is what we do with our money, because I think that's a fun way to do it. So let's get started. The portfolio entrepreneur, how to run multiple companies at the same time. Essentially, this is what you get to do when you achieve exit number 3. And so in all of our businesses, anytime we're foolish enough, and thankfully we've largely gotten out of this practice, but anytime we've been foolish enough to start a business, we are over-starting businesses. Every now and then, we'll have an idea, and it's like, let's not start it. Let's go see if we can buy one instead.
I'll generally give him my favorite financial advice or business advice on starting a business. I'm like, that's really cool, Ryan. We could make hundreds of dollars.
Hundreds of dollars. Hundreds of them. All the hundreds of dollars. Our goal in any time we're involved in any business is for us certainly to achieve exit number 3, to exit the org chart. Also, when we're working with entrepreneurs, if that's their goal, we want them to do it as well. What we're talking about here is what you get to do when you achieve exit number 3. How do you achieve exit number 3? You have an operating system in place, and you got an operator to operate the operating system. That sequence, by the way, is really, really important. A lot of people want to try to get a Richard before they got an operating system. It's kind of tough. Right? What you really want to do is bring somebody in to help you create the operating system, and then you bring the operator in to run the operating system. If you got an operator, cool, have them do that, but generally sequence, system, then operator to operate the operating system. Let's say we got all those things, exit number 3, we've exited the org chart. Now, if you want, you've got a couple of choices that you can make. You can say, okay, all I want to do is focus on this one core business. I want to focus on it. I want to grow this one business. And that could be a really good focused thing. I just want to keep all my focus here. And I know lots of entrepreneurs who have done that. What you can also say is, this is great. I want to do more of these. Does anybody else suffer or struggle with entrepreneurial ADHD? Yeah. So people have said, they're like, you know what, I think you would have been a lot more successful if you just focused on one company and just grown that one company. I don't know that that's necessarily true. In many cases, I don't think it's true. Here's what I know. It wouldn't have been as much fun. Would have been certainly not for me. Here's the other thing I know. Every major company at scale eventually becomes a holding company. Every big company at scale that you know of eventually begins to acquire other businesses and bring them together. So even though you think it's one business, it is not. Roland talked about roll-ups, gave you lots of examples. So even if you're thinking, oh, I just want to focus on this one business, really good chance if you focus on scaling one business, that one business is going to turn into a holding company. So what is a holding company? Holding company is a company whose primary interest is to own a controlling interest in other companies. Pretty simple. That's a holding company. It's a company that, wait for it, holds companies. I know it's day 3, but are y'all following so far? Okay. What are some types of holding companies? Roll-ups. This is what Roland talked about yesterday. Right? These are companies that look to accumulate businesses that all do more or less the same thing in pursuit of that magic business word, synergy, right? Synergy and economies of scale. So waste management did this. And anytime there's an industry where there's a lot of small little players, pretty common, go in there, roll them all up, give them similar branding. Obviously, that's what Sam's doing right now.
Our buddy Marcus Lamanis did that.
Yep.
He's got one of the more well-known ones.
What, for those who don't know, who is he and what does he do?
Marcus has had a show called The Prophet for several years. He's got a couple of new ones that are out now, but he's a friend of ours who is the CEO of, what is the name?
Camping World.
Camping World. So he rolled up RV parks.
It's really funny because if you know Marcus, you know he's not really a camper.
I don't see him as
he's not really an outdoors kind of guy.
No, I don't see him.
He's definitely not. Yeah, so that's a roll up. So the idea of a roll up is we're rolling up the same types of businesses, generally putting them under one brand, but we're trying to get a bunch of them all in one, grow inorganically. The second is the accumulator. We're talking about a cluster of different businesses. They're generally in the same industry or they have the same business model, but you're not necessarily looking to integrate them together, right? Roland mentioned yesterday, LVMH, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, right? What this is an accumulation of luxury brands. So in this case, a lot of different brands that have very similar systems, very similar playbooks, right? They're going through similar distribution channels. When they're buying another high-end liquor, they can place those and slot them right next to their other high-end liquor.
It's also generally known as a house of brands.
Yeah.
That's another common way of talking about it.
Yep. Constellation Software. How many of you have heard of Constellation Software? Raise your hand. Not a lot of people, actually. Constellation Software is one of the most valuable software companies in the world, based out of Canada. Most people don't know Constellation because they basically have bought up a lot of legacy software companies, particularly software companies that aren't SaaS. They're not in the cloud. And they've accumulated all these companies, and they've built just billions and billions of dollars of enterprise value. So that's the accumulator. You have a pure holdco. A pure holdco is just a portfolio of completely unrelated businesses that primarily it's functioning in a capital allocation capacity.
Also known as a conglomerate.
Also known as a conglomerate, also known as Berkshire Hathaway, right? So Warren Buffett, he owns Geico, he owns Coke, he owns, large chunk of Apple, I think, still. What do these companies have in common? Nothing. What resources do they share? None. Okay? This is a pure holding company. And then there's another group, kind of a subset, the platform. This is a holding company that's made up of multiple accumulators. And what you see is that the holding company is fractal. So it's very common, and this is the case with us, where our holding company will acquire a company, and that company will eventually become a holding company. And then it has another company, which is another holding company, and this whole thing's right? It's kind of like a family. Kids have kids, and you got grandkids. And so you have holding companies that have holding companies, and they get moved around. And most of the really large Fortune 500 companies that you know about that are listed as one company are really a combination of a lot of different companies. Most of your billion-dollar companies are actually a collection of $10 and $100 million companies. Most of your $100 million companies are collections of $1 million and $10 million companies. That may not be how their entity structure is, their accounting, but that's functionally how it works.
Yeah, and let's talk about, because a lot of you ask about entity structure. So probably the most common question is, do I need to have a company for every company that I've got? And the answer depends, but the answer is really dependent upon what is the goal or the outcome that you've got. Because if generally from a legal standpoint, as an attorney, which I'm not advising you, with no legal advice being dispensed here.
This is entertainment purposes only.
Purposes
Are you
only.
entertained?
Yeah. Are you not entertained? But what we generally say is you want a separate company to provide a liability shield from each of the other companies so that the assets of one company are not at risk should something go awry with the other companies. And when you're doing this personally, you can decide what is my acceptable level of risk. So you generally should start with one company. It could be an LLC or a corporation. It doesn't really matter for liability purposes. It does matter for tax purposes. But from a liability standpoint, when you get enough in that company and you're thinking about doing something else, then it's a good idea to take a pause and say, would I be upset or financially disadvantaged if something bad was to happen with this new thing I'm thinking about doing, and I was to lose the assets of this company.